The Pacers' schedule is here, and running through it game by game sometimes sounds silly, but it's the best way to see the hard patches, to see where they will struggle, and to predict their final record this season. We'll do it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News. And today, it is my favorite episode of the year because it is the most revealing episode to me somehow every year. The schedule's out, and we're going through it game by game. This sounds like such a silly exercise sometimes, but you get through it. And you can see the back-to-backs, and you can see the hard home games that come at a weird time for travel, and you can see the rest disadvantages really start to stack up, and it makes the season story tell itself. And for example, last year, the Pacers' schedule started off insanely hard, and when you ran through it game by game, you realized how hard it was. And the Pacers started 1-6 and never recovered. The order of games does matter. This is my favorite show of the year. I learn a lot, and I hope you will learn a lot as well. And we'll predict the Pacers' record today. Joining me to do that, the person I've done this with for 6 years in a row, 5 years in a row now, Adam Friedman, former host of the show, and he'll be back for our other favorite show of the year, overreacting to the Pacers' first game in a few months. We're psyched. Adam, how are you doing?
Has it really been 6 years? 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 5 years.
5 years. You're right. Because we didn't do it in 2017 because we were doing stupid shows then.
Yeah. Sure. Whatever you say. So do we know the record in the last 4 years? We're probably split, right? Each year. Like, I feel like it ends up, I think we lost track of it, but I think it's probably 2-2. So we could call this
we also do a contest to see who gets closer to their actual record and predicts more games right. And unfortunately, last year's is lost in time because I don't know how to not delete a Google sheet when my Google Drive gets too full. So you were up by like 7 games when it went away. So I will assume you won last year.
That's because I think I had a lower record than you had, right?
You did, and when they only win 25 games, having a lower record is beneficial. We also get pretty close to their win total compared to the fan base every year, which I think has proven to be valuable, except for in the first year, the Depot winning 48 games year. We were not.
Yeah,
close.
I think I was optimistic and had 38 wins that year, which I think was like at the time. I think they were over under was 30 and a half, give or take. So yes. I think I also won the first year because of that, but that was still way off. About 10
I was low on the Aaron Holiday, Tyreek Evans offseason. I won that year. Either way, it's a fun exercise. It's revealing. We're going to jump right in because the Pacers, unlike last year, where they had such a hard start that usually coaches and execs are like, it's 82 games, whatever. Like even Rick Carlisle and Kevin Pritchard were like, our schedule's hard. this is tough. It's going to be tough. And they started 1-6, and they got to 2 games below 500 by mid-December, but never really got out of it. And for when you sell your whole team and change direction, like I'm not saying that that's why they were not a good team anyway, but that definitely played a hand in the story of their season. So this year, the start is much, much different. They open at home against the Wizards, then they're at home against San Antonio, and then they're at home against Detroit. San Antonio, one of 2 teams in the league with a lower over-under than the Pacers, according to DraftKings this year. Detroit, not looking to be too solid. Washington, not looking to be too solid. But that the San Antonio-Detroit duo is a back-to-back. Adam, how do you see the season starting for the Pacers?
So I want to say in the first 3 games, they'll start off 2-1. I'm now trying to decide what 2 they'll win. I want to say they're going to win their first game at home. It's going to be weird because we don't know what is Turner going to be the starting center after this whole offseason. Probably, it seems like they're going to probably start a rookie. It seems like, or at least going to play significant amount of minutes. So how does that play just in the first game? But I want to say just a home game against a team that's I guess Washington they're probably competing for the 8 seed, the back 9-10 this year. But I guess I'll go with the win against Washington to start, just because it's a home game. They should win their first home game. It's kind of, I don't know, exciting. People might get some hope all of a sudden.
Yeah, everybody's psyched for the first home game. It's not a new stadium like when they played the Bucks in the first 5.
No, but a new team. It's really kind of a newish team.
New team, new construction inside the arena. I think they're gonna beat Washington.
I didn't think about the construction. Good call.
Yeah, they'll beat San Antonio, one of 2 teams that have a better win total projection from DraftKings, and then they play Detroit who has a higher win projection than them. And it's a back-to-back. So while I think they could be better at home than Detroit on a back-to-back, I will go win-win-loss to start the season.
I think I'll follow you in that win-win loss. I think that makes the most sense. I could see it go another way with the San Antonio Detroit game. You just they lose one to San Antonio, win Detroit. Who knows? But I think you're probably right on that one.
It'll be a fun honeymoon for about 2 seconds, and then things get immediately difficult. 5-game road trip right after the start of the season, immediately followed by a tough stretch of home opponents. But the 5-game road trip, Philadelphia, who has title aspirations, Chicago, who would like to do better than last year, Washington again, and then 2 games in Brooklyn against TJ Warren, against Edmund Sumner. I don't know what that team's going to look like, but I don't think they'll be embarrassingly bad. I think this will be a tough stretch. I'm not sure they win any of these except for maybe splitting in Brooklyn.
You took the words right out of my mouth, basically. So like, I'm looking at this. I don't really see a winnable game. The only winnable game would be Brooklyn, especially if KD is holding out still. If Kyrie isn't on that team, or I don't know, whatever the hell he's doing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's straight losses till like Orlando in mid-November. I feel like
they're good even after this road trip, like I was just talking about. They come home, then they play Miami, who is just a Max Strus out of bounds away from a finals appearance, and New Orleans with Zion, and Denver with the MVP, and Toronto, who always kicks the Pacers' butt. And then they're in Charlotte against the play-in team, and then they're in Houston. They could be Houston.
Yeah, you're right. Houston's probably
that. Even when they come back home from this trip, like they need to get, for example, the first Brooklyn game of that 2 is a back-to-back. Like if I had to pick a win in Brooklyn, I would pick the last one. And then they play a bunch of hard teams at home. Like they could reasonably lose, like after a nice fun start, like 7, 8 in a row before they play Orlando twice at home.
So you think a patient that spent 3 days in New York is going to end up being good on a second game in Brooklyn? I mean, I have another one where they spent like 2 days in LA. They're also probably going to lose both those games, but those teams are good as well. But like, I actually don't know if spending 3 days in New York is going to be good for the Pacers, just because it's a young team. So
you think they'll lose all 5 of the road trip?
Yeah, I do.
So they beat Miami early in the season last year. That's their next game after the road trip. Thankfully, they get 4 days off between Brooklyn and Miami pretty early in the season. And then they get 2 days off before New Orleans. I think they can beat Miami. They beat Miami early in the season last year. But in general, I think between Miami, New Orleans, Denver, and Toronto, they'll be hard-pressed to even win one of those games.
So I think they'll lose to Miami but beat New Orleans. Just, I don't know. At this point, you don't usually lose unless you're like just terrible. You don't usually lose like 8 games in a row at this point. I would be that just because you can salvage one.
So your losing streak after they win their first 2 is 7 in a row coming out of that.
It's a tough schedule.
Yeah, every schedule is tough when you're not not a very
not good. I mean, they're not like used to be like you would say there's like 25 bad teams they'll probably go 22-3 against, and then toss-ups on the like middle range teams and lose to all the good teams and we steal one, right? I'm not even sure you can say that. I think you could count like 2/3 of the leagues they'll probably consistently lose to, and a third they might have a shot against.
Yeah, especially like in the past, I would always say, oh, they'll easily beat Orlando in any situation. Like they do well against Miami, they do well against New Orleans. Like I can't even use those barometers anymore because all the players you think about that do well in that ecosystem, like Sabonis or Brogdon or whoever it was, are not on the team. Like it's hard to say who is and isn't good in these situations. They did well against Denver both times they played last year, even though they lost both. But I mean, they still have
that one game where they had to lead in the third quarter, gave up like 20 straight points or something insane.
They lost to the Jokic-less Nuggets in Toronto or in Denver, excuse me.
And they went like 20-0 run, right, in the fourth third to fourth quarter stretch. It was terrible.
Exactly. Yes. So I think they lose to Denver, and then Toronto beat them by almost 50 last season. I see no way that turns around.
Yeah, I think they lose Denver and Toronto, and I think they probably lose the next one at Charlotte. Although Charlotte is probably more of a toss-up. I mean, Charlotte is better, but they're still Charlotte.
Yeah, they always do pretty well against Charlotte because that team has no paint protection whatsoever, and they still have decent rim attackers on this team. I think they can win in Charlotte. I think they pick up their second road win of the season there.
And by this point, Hayward probably be out for this season already, right?
Wow, shots fired at a guy the Pacers were courting for a while.
I love Gordon Hayward. He's played 40 games and like he's played very. And last season, I don't know how many he's played. It's not been much since he signed that contract 2 years ago now, right? It's been 2 years, or was
That's correct. So 3-10, you've got them at, and then they have a nicer schedule from mid-November to even you could say or like December 5th. They have a hard game or two in there, but they go at Houston. They play the Magic at home twice. They play the Timberwolves at home, who should be good.
Yeah.
Brooklyn at home, at both LA teams, one of whom is good. At Sacramento, which will be a huge game. At Utah, who's going to stink, and at Portland, who's going to be okay. I think they can go through that stretch looking okay. I think they can beat Houston, but I don't think they will on the road. I think they can beat Orlando twice. I think they can beat Brooklyn at home, for example. And the Sacramento game, that could be the one. Tyrese Halliburton back in Sacramento. Sabonis against the Pacers for the first time. A lot of energy. I think the Pacers can win that and beat Utah. That's a lot of wins for me in that stretch.
So, all right. So we're going with that stretch. I would say win against Houston on the road. Houston's just not very good, and they're still probably not going to be good. I got a barring like a Jalen Green leap. Let's split the Orlando games. Let's say they win the first one, lose the second one. I think it's hard to beat a team twice. And
Sure.
and Orlando's, they're not like going to be all in tank, right? They have the number one pick. They have Paolo, who's going to be trying. They've got Franz Wagner. How do you say it? Wagner.
You're right, Wagner. Yep.
Yeah, so they're decent. I mean, they won't be like a non-trying team at this point. Minnesota, they definitely lose to. Minnesota, I think is pretty good. Going to be pretty good this year. The Brooklyn game, I'm going to go lost Brooklyn, but I think they managed to beat the Lakers in Los Angeles. Right? What LA one is this on your schedule? Is this the Lakers?
I didn't. I should have listed this out better. Which one's LA and which one's Los Angeles? I
think
believe
the
it's
Lakers.
the Lakers first.
Okay, it's Clippers first and Lakers second.
Okay. Well, I think they're losing both anyway.
I think they'll lose the Clippers but beat the Lakers. I think the Lakers are going to be bad.
They did beat the Lakers in LA last year and then beat Golden State 2 nights later. What was perhaps the most fond stretch of the Pacers season, their last hope of survival.
And then everything collapsed from on out. I think they lose at Sacramento just because it's on the road. I think they lose at Utah. Still, although Utah's not going to be that good.
They're going to be bad.
Yeah, they're going to be pretty bad. Now, let me change it. They usually beat Utah, right? They've been pretty successful with Utah the past couple of years.
Very successful against the Jazz.
So let's go win against Utah, lost at Portland, and lost Golden State, and then we can do it again. Lost.
Hold on before you talk about Golden State. So currently, we are 23 games in, and I'm shockingly at 10 wins, which is surprising to me. You were at 7. That was fun. It was fun to talk about the Pacers being
500 team, basically.
Sort of interesting to this point. They'll probably be in the bottom half, near the bottom of the East, but like a credible record. For the next month, things get pretty dire. We'll go up to Christmas before our first break here, but my goodness, is this crazy. Here's the next month for the Pacers after that Portland game. At Golden State, at Minnesota, versus Washington, versus Brooklyn, versus Miami, versus Golden State, at Cleveland, versus New York, at Boston, at Miami, at New Orleans, versus Atlanta, versus Cleveland, versus the Clippers, versus Toronto, at Philly in a month. That is basically all playoff teams besides the Wizards for a month. I mean, that is an insane stretch. A lot of road games in there. That is where I think that this season comes off the rails.
So do you think there's a single win in this stretch?
I think they will beat the Knicks between where we are and Christmas, but that is it.
I'm going to go with they beat Cleveland in this stretch. We'll lose the rest.
No, they don't want to beat Cleveland. They would like the Cavs to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm not saying they won't. I mean, but the Cavs are going to probably make the playoffs, I would think, but I guess who knows.
So now that we've done that brutal part of the stretch, it's Christmas Day. Pacers fans wake up, and they are 8-25 per your projections, or 11-22 per mine. Their schedule is not easy. It doesn't really get easy, but thankfully they have a nice, easy start to get fans' hearts into it. Let's do this post-Christmas up to All-Star break stretch. Before we do that, though, I got to talk to you guys about the great people over at Rocket Money. If you keep on saying you need to make a budget but never do it, if somehow you keep missing credit card payments, if you're afraid to look at your bank statements, then it's time to take back control of your financial life. Meet Rocket Money, formerly Truebill, our favorite financial app. Why did Truebill change its name to Rocket Money? Well, we'll tell you what we heard. Truebill, now backed by Rocket Companies, has grown from a bill management app into a full-on personal finance empowerment tool that helps over 3.4 million people with budgeting, lowering bills, canceling subscriptions, and more, saving each of their members an average of $700 a year. With all that growth becomes the next evolution in Truebill's story, a new name. Rocket Money is everything you loved about Truebill with a fresh new look and feel. Start canceling your unused subscriptions and save money at rocketmoney.com rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. That's rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA, or download the app from the App Store or Google Play Store. Thanks, everybody, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, go hop on over to Locked On Nets, I suppose. Hear the latest about Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, whatever the heck's going on with that team that still has TJ Warren, Edmund Sumner on it. And they'll be a fun team to watch the Pacers go against this coming season. Out of Christmas in New Orleans. How nice for the Pacers. They get to spend Christmas in New Orleans. And then a nice homestand. How do you feel about that stretch out of New Orleans and then at home for Atlanta, Cleveland, LA Clippers, and Toronto?
Sounds like 4 tough games. 5, really, if you have to win the road, but 4 tough home games.
I agree. I think they can beat Cleveland in that stretch, but if you're counting all losses, I think all losses would make some sense as well.
Yeah, I would go with that. So what how many have I lost in a row now? Okay, they still
in a row. You had a win at Cleveland, so you had a 1 win stopping them from a 16-game losing streak at that point.
Well, that feels about right.
That is not unreasonable in their winter months. I mean, they don't play. You know, if you just look at the win totals in that stretch, they don't play San Antonio, they don't play Houston, they don't play Orlando, they don't play OKC, they don't play Detroit, they don't play Sacramento. Utah's the last game before it that kind of kicks it off. I guess Portland is. But Utah's the kind of last easy game before it. And Utah's over-under is 32.5, which is still 8 more wins than the Pacers. And they're kind of in another tier below. The teams kind of get serious. So all the easy teams are avoided from this stretch. Their home opponents are really tough. They don't really have an easy, air quotes, opponent until Thursday, January 28th. I mean, I don't think any NBA team would lose. Like Tyrese Halliburton's good. Miles Turner's good. Buddy Hield is okay. I don't think with the amount of three-point shooting variance they'll have that they would actually lose 16 games in a row, but it's not like off the table in a way that it was in past seasons.
Yeah, they don't. They're just not going to be very good. I mean, I'll also put it. They don't have any like blue chippers. I guess they have a lot of like potentials. Is maybe the right way to put it. And then their depth is kind of lacking. It's very youth heavy team. Now there is a chance, sure, with some youth heavy that somebody sort of makes a leap we didn't see coming, and that changes the trajectory. I mean, that sort of happened to the team the last time they sort of were rebuilding in 2018 when Fisher did this podcast. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't really see it, but I would love to be proven wrong.
The other tough part of this stretch, 2 easier games, Washington and Brooklyn. That's a back-to-back. Another kind of easier opponents, New Orleans and Atlanta. That's a back-to-back with travel in between, right? It's just, it's killer. It is really killer, even until they really get back home for, it looks like 6 out of 7, or 6 out of 8, excuse me, until about mid-January. The opponents don't really ease up until they get OKC and Orlando later in the month. And that's kind of the consequence of the NBA being just better right now. But they also have back-to-backs mixed into that stretch as well. They've got Chicago and then at Orlando. Orlando is as hard as it can be on the road to travel back-to-back. You know, it is a really rough schedule from December till February, basically. So we're now at January 4th. They've got Philly, Portland, Charlotte, New York, Atlanta, Memphis coming, and Milwaukee. I'll include them in there too. Another tough stretch coming up here, but a lot of home games here. Do you think they can sneak any wins out of that group? No back-to-backs in that stretch.
I think they might beat Charlotte.
I think they have good matchups against Charlotte for sure. Same with Atlanta, really. But in general,
I think also might win in New York. I think they could win 2 games in a row.
All right. Back-to-back wins. They would need that at that stage.
They have a lot of days off between the games, right? So that's helpful.
They do.
But yeah, then I think, so now do you pick them to beat Oklahoma City?
Milwaukee's funny because they haven't had a serious performance against the Milwaukee Bucks since 2018 when Thad Young was still on the team. I mean, we could just
remember they beat them when Thad was the Giannis stopper.
That's right. Giannis was like, man, that's one of the best defensive performances on me ever. And then they've only beat them without Giannis in the interim. Yeah, even when it like I'm just counting OKC as easier comparatively.
But they're also the same. They got some good young players. Josh.
Well, and even for this is the rest of January from where we are. Include the Milwaukee game we just both predicted them to lose. They play 8 more games after that Memphis home game from January 16th to the end of the month. They play 8 more games in the month. 6 of them are on the road, and the 2 home games they play are Chicago and Milwaukee. The road games are Milwaukee, OKC, Denver, Phoenix, Orlando, Memphis. I mean, it just does not. When the weather's going to be cold, the Pacers are going to be cold. Like, it is brutal until the break, even, really.
Yeah, I think they probably lose at Oklahoma City, lose at Denver, lose at Phoenix, lose at home at Chicago, and probably still lose at Orlando too. They're not going to sweep Orlando.
Let me add in some things that I missed in that road stretch, by the way. At Denver, the altitude game, and then a back-to-back against Phoenix, who was in the finals 2 years ago. Then they play Chicago 3 days later, and then immediately travel to Orlando for another back-to-back. I think they'll beat OKC and then lose every game through that Orlando back-to-back. We know they lose to Milwaukee. I'm assuming you agree with that as well.
Yeah.
So it's just killer. Like, now, remember, I had them at 10-13, like kind of rosy start. It's now 15-36, right? So they have now won 5 of their last 28 games for me. And you, Adam, have January 27th being a big day. Do you know why?
January 27th? Oh, is that the anniversary? No. What is January 27th?
That is the day that you predict they will have lost half of their games officially. 41 losses for you.
I thought you were trying to hit the Victor Oladipo injury history thing. I think it was the 23rd. That's 23rd, though.
To close out through the break, the All-Star break, where we'll cut for the final stretch and just kind of summarizing thoughts. It's at Memphis versus the Lakers versus the Kings versus the Cavs. That's kind of doable for a home stretch, but hey, that Lakers-Kings back-to-back. At Miami versus Phoenix, at Washington versus Utah versus Chicago. How do they close out the break? How do you see this?
I see loss at Memphis. I'm going to pick wins against the Lakers, Kings, loss against Cleveland, loss against Miami, loss against Phoenix, win against Utah, or win against Washington, win against Utah. So some wins there, I think.
Yeah, so I agree with the loss in Memphis. So this Lakers game at home, everybody plays their best against the Lakers. The Pacers, basically, if Chris Duarte got called for a foul, would have swept them last year. That February 3rd game, a back-to-back, will be Sabonis' return to Indiana, and Tyrese Haliburton will always be up against the Kings. This is a weird stretch of the season, though, because it's right before the trade deadline. You never know who's playing and who won't be. For example, the Pacers had that game in Atlanta this past season where they had 8 available players, one of whom was Torrey Craig, who got traded the next day. Reggie Perry was on the team. Like, it's crazy how weird these games can be. So I will give them a win over the Lakers and Kings as well, and then losses every game the rest of the way till the break, except for a win over Utah, who I agree with you. They still will play well against, and they now reach the All-Star break trade deadline area-ish with somewhere, if we're correct in our predictions here, between 14 and 18 wins. Yikes. But at least it will be clear. So this is something we have to bake into our closing stretch here. If Miles Turner has not signed a contract extension by this point, which why would he? He will not be on the team for the rest of the games we'll be talking about. Buddy Hield, who knows if he'll be on the team for the rest of the games we'll be talking about. TJ McConnell, Daniel Tice, it all could change. Plus, now they need to be careful with minutes. Now they need to try to get guys like Andrew Nembhard out there more, Kendall Brown out there more, right? So the games down the stretch, even if they could be more competitive, they maybe won't be. So let's finish this off. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, hop on over to Locked On Jazz, since we've been dumping on the Jazz and saying that the Pacers always beat them, where you can hear David Locke talk about the latest out of Utah, Donovan Mitchell, that Jazz schedule, and more. I just realized we missed a game before the All-Star break. So I think we both just given Chicago a loss there.
I was about to say that. Sorry.
So they come out of the break nice and on the road heavy, which is not great, but a couple fun games right after the All-Star break. One, they host Boston, Malcolm Brogdon's return on February 23rd. Then they have a nice couple days off before a road trip where they go to Orlando, not too bad, to Dallas for Rick Carlisle reunion, to San Antonio, a winnable game, and to Chicago, who is good, but not impossible, before a nice home back-to-back with Philly that might as well be a road game because of the travel. How do you see that stretch kind of shaking out post All-Star break as they get into March?
Well, we were assuming Brogdon's healthy for that game. Also, sorry, now I think lose versus Boston, win at Orlando, lost Dallas, lost in San Antonio, lost in Chicago, and lost to Philly.
I think they will. So something we talked about is even if they don't have Turner and all these guys, like you have to imagine San Antonio and Orlando are also crummy, and the Pacers will still have Halliburton. So I think they will beat Orlando and San Antonio. I think the Spurs are going to be quite bad this season, but I have the same losses as you in that span. And then things get fun. They play Philly on March 6th. And why do things get fun? Because it's March. And if you've lived in Indiana for any time of your life, you know that in March, Gainbridge Fieldhouse is not the Pacers' home. It is the Big Ten men's tournament. It's the Big Ten women's tournament. It hosts some random, most likely at least, it will be part of the regional for one of the two, if not both, NCAA tournaments. There will be a lot of basketball played in Gainbridge Fieldhouse, very little of it by the Pacers, and that is something that's happened every year for them for all time. So they have a 3-game road trip, then they come home for a 1-weekend home game.
I
And then
think
a 4-game
they'll
road
play the
trip, and then a week.
regionals at Lucas Oil though. But yeah, I get your point still. Your point still is valid. But I think they'll play the regionals at Lucas Oil.
Oh, that's right, for the NCAA tournament. The Big
But
Ten
you are right about.
tournament.
But there's the high school basketball tournaments. You are right
Right.
about there a ton of stuff. I mean, if you go back to 2019, the last basically pre-COVID year, I think they did win a single game in March that year. They put a bunch of every other day game, and they lost a ton of them. And they were kind of an average team anyways, but they were just they had a terrible month of March. So
it's not as famous as the rodeo trip or some of the other, the Oscars trip for the LA teams, like road trips that have a name, because the Pacers can come home for some weekend
but
games,
it's
and they
still
do in March. But
a lot of
it's
stuff.
pretty close, at least if you follow the Pacers every year. It's pretty close to a lock that they will have one or two lengthy road trips in March, which can be tough if you're trying to be good and competitive. The other issue is if you're trying to break this down game by game, they finally get some easy opponents in the month of March, but it's a lot of road games. They play Houston, they play Detroit twice, they've got Charlotte, they've got OKC, Cleveland, Detroit again, New York, all down the stretch of the season, and a ton of them are on the road. So they're a chance to catch up to that over-under number they have of 24.5 from DraftKings. Yeah, they could get some wins here in the last month. I mean, they play some easier teams, but it's still not easy given their back-to-backs, given their travel, and all sorts of those things.
So now I'm trying to think. I hate to do this, but I'm trying to think. They're going to probably win 20 games, and I got to figure out they're going to get 5 wins here, basically.
I'm already at 20, and I think I think what's going to happen is when they hit this stretch of, March 9th is officially 1 month ago. Their season ends April 9th. Houston and Detroit and all these other teams will be a little more tanky than the Pacers because Tyrese Halliburton's good. He is good now, and he will be one of the best players on these tanking teams, and thus the Pacers will naturally just beat them. So I'll probably predict them to get a nice little 3-game win streak here, which will be frustrating for fans, of course, who will not be rooting for wins anymore. But I think that they can win those games. I think they will beat OKC at the end of that month. I think they'll beat Detroit in April, for example. I think they'll beat New York in April. Like that, all of a sudden, I have 6 wins in their last month of the season, and I've got them pretty close to that over-under total that they're at.
I think you're more optimistic. I mean, if they get to this point and they're close to being on that, record-wise, they're just going to start tanking it out. I mean,
yeah, if they're close to the 1 seed, I mean, things will change up. Because I think they'll lose to Milwaukee. I mean, Philly, the teams pushing for playoff seeding, Toronto, Boston, Atlanta, Dallas, Milwaukee again. They'll have a tough stretch again. They could lose 8 in a row, which they lost 10 in a row to close this past season. They have shown they know how to end the season in a certain way. But then they played Cleveland April 2nd, a team they'll be wanting to make the playoffs at that stage. And then they close in New York. Who knows what could happen there? Maybe they have a nice ending to the season. I've got them at 26 wins right now. I will say that they lose to end their season. Adam has them with a win. Whew, what an exercise. The other thing in this stretch, not a lot of back-to-backs as they close through their season. Their last month, because of all the travel they have, is actually their least back-to-back intensive month. So while it looks nice with no back-to-backs, it's still a struggle in that they have a lot of travel. Adam, it is jarring to see as we conclude this exercise 62 losses from you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. Have they ever lost 60 games in franchise history? I'm trying to remember.
I do not believe they have.
Right, I think they got close in the 80s, but I don't think they actually have ever lost 60 games.
So I have said on this show a few times in the last couple of weeks, talking about Tyrese Halliburton's future, talking about the schedule, talking about what this team could look like this coming year in general, talking about how many close losses they had last year, that I think they will win about as many, if not a little bit more games than last season when they won 25. And look at that. I did this exercise and got 26. And I think that that a lot of this could change at the deadline. If they're better than it's thought to be leading into that deadline time, maybe they hold on to Buddy Hield or McConnell or something, and then they get closer to 30. But if they're much worse than projections in mid-April, it could be much harder for them to reach that 24.5 because they could trade away a lot of the players that could help them get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably the worst team they've fielded in my lifetime, probably my lifetime. I mean, like I think the 2017-18 team sort of, in hindsight, became good, obviously, but I'm not sure at the beginning of the year we thought it was any good. I mean, it took one player, and then everybody else kind of fit around it very well. Although you could make a case the team before that was pretty bad. Outside of, if they didn't have Paul George, that team probably would have won like 12 games because they had a bunch of non-NBA players on the roster. But the team's just not a very good team this year. I mean, there isn't a lot of talent. I'm still kind of questionable on the coaching, to be honest. I really can't figure out whether the coach wants to be a GM or not, and that whole saga. And then, like, there's been players that have rumored all summer long, and none of them got moved. So what does that mean? Like, it just feels like this team that is sort of like going to come in with a lot of sort of just like weird question marks that just lead to you being a bad team. And then it could even be kind of, they're so bad they clear house or do some weird, we see a lot of changes, but I don't know. We'll just sort of say, usually teams that have back-to-back 20-loss seasons that didn't just hire their GM, don't keep their GM, don't keep their coach, don't keep somebody. Now they could. Pacers are always a team that kind of stresses continuity. They've had basically the same kind of people in place for 20-something years now, because Bird and Pritchard are very much tied, I think, together in some ways because of just the way they work together. But still, you never actually know. So I just think it's a weird year.
I think that it's going to be a weird year. I don't think there'll be changes because I think most people realize internally it's kind of a new era transition year. Maybe next year if things don't look drastically better or they're this bad again. But they've only lost 60 games to what you said earlier, twice in franchise history, pre-Herb Simon's ownership in their NBA days. So that would be the 84-85 season. They would draft Chuck Person around that time, Reggie Miller a few years later. And then the other time when they lost their most was 82-83. They went 20-62, 2 years after their first NBA playoff appearance. So if they do reach 60 losses, as you have predicted here, that would be rough.
I think when you talk about those 2 seasons, you talk about the one season where they lost, they traded away the pick, it could have been Michael Jordan, and then a pick that you traded away, or they didn't win the draft for Patrick Ewing. So it's a good sign, I guess, of what could come when they're bad.
That was fun. Something else I think noteworthy as we went through this one. Well, first of all, back-to-backs mattered less to me when they're bad than when they're good. Like it doesn't swing as much. Something else, though, noteworthy to me is that, under McMillan, they very rarely lost to teams that they shouldn't lose to. And there were some more like not good teams, from 2017 to 2020, I would say. Teams where it was obvious that their aspirations were what they were. Whereas in the NBA right this second, today, I have OKC, Detroit, Orlando, Indiana, Houston, and I don't know with Greg Popovich, maybe San Antonio. It looks like San Antonio. Should be bad. That's 6 teams. The other 24, I think, all probably think they are going to either be in the play-in or be in the postseason. So that makes it pretty hard to get like bag wins in a way that there's way fewer cupcake games, especially when a lot of those teams, San Antonio, Houston, OKC, are out west. You play them less often. Like it's a lot harder to bag those wins to get to even 30 wins, for example, 35 wins, because there's just not as many easy games. And even those teams like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is on OKC. He's very good on these, not very talented teams. It's not like the Pacers have an inherent advantage over basically, besides San Antonio, who I think is just going to be junk, like anybody in the league. So it's really hard to find. I mean, yes, they have some streaky shooters. I'm really high on Halliburton, but it's hard to easily just be like, yes, these are teams that they can just roll over every time they play them in a way that, under McMillan or with old talent, you could find.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a team in the East that is more likely to tank than the Pacers. I mean, I think Detroit and Orlando might not be great, but I think they have desires to be good because they think they have two former, each one of them one pick, who the idea is you don't usually tank once you have them one pick because you try to, put a good roster around them because it's sort of how you develop. Right. The Pacers' highest draft pick is their pick this year. And, then like Halliburton picked 11, I think, or something in that range. But like, they don't really have that like first pick top 2 guy. They're trying to sort of use a piece to build off of and try to at least like pretend to be good all year. They're, rest teams in the East are going to be decent. I mean, they're all going to try. I mean, I could see like Washington could fall out. Something that was a Beal, right? Obviously can't be traded this year. Go sign the extension, but something could happen there, right? I could see that kind of falling apart. Charlotte always is a combustible thing. I feel like it just feels like every season. But besides that, I don't look at any other team in the East. Like the Cleveland, it's going to be good. They were pretty good last year, and to be honest, if Mobley plays the whole year, they're going to be even better. Because I think he's probably going to get better this year. Like there's no team in the East that you're like they're going to be terrible unless something happens, right? Unless some injuries,
Right.
unless somebody holds out. Otherwise, it's like every team's going to be trying hard. It's going to be hard for the Pacers.
And I think that, last year, I think early in the season, I said this a few times more so than late in the year, but there were some games where, Duarte was shooting 16, 17, 18 times early in the season. In retrospect, yeah, that was great. But they were trying to win then, right? Like they had Sabonis, they had Brogdon, they had LeVert, they were mostly healthy early in the season. Like they were trying to win to the point where it was like, that might be too much and that might be costing them to an extent. This year with Matherin, it's going to be like, yeah, dude, shoot, like do what you want to do, get better, get the reps, things like that. And not to the point where they're not giving reps to other young players, but I think there'll be games where if they had played Buddy Hield 5 more minutes over Matherin, they might win, but they'd rather give it to Matherin. So I think in close games, I think they will obviously just have luck more on their side than last year, where it was just insane. No, they're still going to be pretty bad just because of who they'll favor and what their priorities, in theory, at least on paper, look like they'll be this coming year.
Yeah, and the team is sort of set up to just have a bunch of young talent that when they can get a top star pick, and they can put him in, and that can be a decent team, hopefully. But I don't know what I used to joke with I'm a big Reds fan. They were always like 2019 was my big Reds year. I was like after they kind of went on the tank in 2013 or 14. The Pacers, I'm kind of thinking 2024, maybe 2025 before I like really think they're going to have a really good team. Now they have a fun team. They have a fun team. Young can always be fun. I don't know how good it's going to be, like playoff wise, until maybe 2 seasons from now.
Yeah, no expectation seasons, I think, are generally fun, even though fans like winning. Obviously, I think there'll be a point where that stretch we were talking about potentially losing 16 in a row, where everyone's like, okay, this sucks. But for a little bit of time, with Matherin being new and Halliburton having the reins, like.
Yeah, the question is like, does Halliburton start putting up like 28 a game? Does it get really fun because he's scoring a ton and they're in close games and they're just competing? I mean, they lose a lot of close games, but they're just like they're there against the good teams. Then you kind of some hope, stuff like that. But we'll have to see. I mean, I don't know. I just don't have any feel right now.
They played the Spurs in the third game. Remember what happened the last time the Pacers had no expectations and had an early game against the Spurs? Victor Oladipo hit a buzzer-beating-ish, close to buzzer-beating 3, hit an iconic celebration,
banked it in.
Changed the franchise fortunes instantly.
I think the Denver game was the turning point in that
season. Oh,
that
was that 48 points or something like that? 45?
Yeah, something insane where they just ran the ISO, basically the Thad Young pick and roll over and over and over and over again until they won the game.
They did that so much, and that was one of those ones where it's like, sometimes you can't stop a guy, but Denver, they had nothing for him.
Well, that would mean looking back, I mean, in hindsight now, you see McMillan coaching another team, like that's his go-to like play for guys. And Oladipo that season shot so well in that shot that it was like it was probably one of the most effective shots in the league, frankly. I mean, it was such a high percentage and it worked. And Oladipo like could just get around and score. It just was kind of incredible. So maybe they find something like that again. I mean, that would be incredible.
He was if they could. Top 15 player in the league that year. He was all NBA.
I swear this team doesn't have the kind of veteran depth that team had, right? That team had Thad Young, Darren Collison, like guys who are not great, but when you put them around a great player, help them be better. Even to some extent was that way that season, where like they don't really have any of those guys. They're relying heavily on young guys to make leaps, which we could sit here in 2 months from now when the season starts and say, wow, Duarte leaped, Halliburton leaped, this team is going to be decent. And Matherin is not as bad as we thought a rookie was going to be, but it just, I'm kind of skeptical.
You don't think a lineup of Halliburton, McConnell, Hield, Tice, and Turner is enough veterans to get Halliburton going?
I don't. I like Turner as a player. Turner is actually probably their best veteran. Turner's a good veteran player. I don't know. I just don't know how the whole summer stuff, how it's going to play. Frankly, I mean, I wouldn't be that happy to fire him currently, frankly, but I'm also a little bit probably more emotional than he is, and he's probably more business-like, considering how he's been talked about for the past 5 seasons.
We didn't even talk about their first games against DeAndre Ayton this year, which will be, of course, very distracting for everyone on the team, getting a million questions about that in the middle of the season as they play Phoenix in November or whenever it is.
God, I have nothing else. So long ago. I mean, it was 2 months ago, but like the Ayton stuff, it just thought for the real minute thought they were going to get him, and like, oh, this is going to be actually going to be decent next year, and then it just.
Yeah, if they had Ayton, I mean, they'd be in the I don't know. I'm just kind of making this up. Like the Charlotte, Washington, like
For sure.
mid to high 30s win totals
Sure.
here, and without him, they are not. They
Yeah.
are not. They are setting up for their center to be a Frenchman next year if they can help it. But
Well,
you know
unless
what?
maybe Turner proves I was wrong. Is what? How many? He's got 2 more left on his deal. No, this is
This is it.
yeah,
This is
contract year,
it.
right? Contract year. God, it's been stuff like he's been this is like what contract year. Maybe he makes the leap we've all been dreaming of for 7 years now, or whatever how long he's been in the league.
You
Got
know, if it happens, it happens. But I would not expect it at this stage of his career, despite thinking he could do better in the role that he currently has. Do you have anything else on the schedule? I think we've reached the end when we're talking about Nate McMillan and Victor Oladipo and things of that
Yeah, we're
sort.
just reminiscing on the good old days. It's like really the good days of 0304, but yeah. No, I
Yeah,
guess we'll just. I guess I told you, I texted you before we were gonna do the show. I said I have no feel for this season. Like it could go a lot of different ways. I don't think they're gonna be that good, but it's one of the weirds where I just don't have a feel. The league in general feels like it's just sort of like changing over as well. I mean, it kind of happened last year too a little bit. But like right with like kind of the Lakers not being a great team, the clip, you saw this kind of change in the guard ish. I felt like
right.
last year, especially with I guess Golden State won, but like Boston kind of becoming the team that was very much changing the guard to kind of these young 20-something-year-olds. So I don't know. We'll see how it plays out this year. I mean, I'll be interested to see what happens just overall in the league because it's kind of getting kind of fun. Teams are getting more. There's more parity. I feel like in a while.
Agreed. There is no obvious title favorite, which is awesome. The rest of this week here, we're talking about some FIBA ball. The Pacers have 4 players, maybe, depending on what Tice ends up doing. Maybe 5 players playing in for their national teams late this month and early next month. We'll talk about what to watch for in those situations and some general news topics. Player interview coming later this week, the day TBD, depending on when I can iron out some other details of an article I'm doing. And another what if as August trudges along. We'll do 2 more of those this month. So you don't want to miss those. Thank you guys a ton for listening. Have a great day, and we see you tomorrow.